This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Turkey moves toward the west as it reestablishes ties with Israel. And Palestinian leader Abbas walks back comments on the Holocaust after creating a firestorm in Germany. Plus, is Iran expanding its terror network to include Al-Qaeda? And translating the original covenant, sparking a global revolution in Bible access. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl. In a move that's seen as a step toward the West and other U.S.-friendly states, Turkey is reestablishing full diplomatic ties with Israel. Turkey's foreign minister announced his country will renew full diplomatic relations with Israel.
After the new government took office and Mr. Herzog was elected as president, a process of dialogue with Israel has started.
He said his country will appoint an ambassador to Tel Aviv. One of his roles will be to help Turkey defend the rights of Palestinians. Israeli President Isaac Herzog tweeted that the move will encourage greater economic relations, mutual tourism, and friendship between the Jewish and Turkish people, adding, "Good neighborly relations and the spirit of partnership in the Middle East are important for us all. Members of all faiths, Muslims, Jews, and Christians can and must live together in peace." The two countries established diplomatic ties in 1949, but relations became strained under President Erdogan.
Israel and Turkey had very warm relations before Recep Erdogan became the president of Turkey. The recent desire on Erdogan's part to renew relations with Israel, many believe comes as a result of Turkey's economy really floundering right now and his own popularity dipping as a result of that.
CBN contributor Eli Kohanim says renewal of relations is meant to help Erdogan, but it's a benefit for both sides.
It's certainly positive for Erdogan, again, because it does give him an economic lifeline potentially and brings him back into the embrace of Western countries. For Israel, Turkey is also an important partner in the region because Turkey is a NATO country.
Dr. Galia Lindenstrauss says in the past, Israel needed relations with Turkey more than Turkey with Israel, but that's not the case now.
Another issue on the agenda is the desire of Turkey to purchase F-16 jets from the United States. And there is hope that somehow the pro-Israel lobby will be more positive to such a deal.
Lindenstrauss says Turkey needs Israel's natural gas and is moving towards normalization while a favorable government is in office. Israel wants to see Turkey cool its relations with Hamas.
From the Israeli side, we know a major bone of contention between the two countries is the presence of Hamas military activities on Turkish soil. We know that this is something that Israel wants Turkey to stop.
According to Kohanim, the nearly 2-year-old Abraham Accords between Israel and 4 Arab countries have had an impact.
So we have a new region where Israel as a Jewish state is able to conduct full diplomatic and even military relations with its Muslim and Arab neighbors. And I do think that the Abraham Accords have certainly made it easier for Erdogan to join a growing list of Muslim countries that have ties to Israel.
Kohanim says that while Erdogan's ultimate goal is to be the head of the Islamic world, the West hopes he'll continue to move towards moderation. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmud Abbas is walking back controversial comments about the Holocaust. In a recent visit to Germany, Abbas was asked about the Palestinian attack on Jewish athletes at the Munich Olympics 50 years ago. His reply set off a firestorm in Germany and here in Israel. Abbas came to Germany on a state visit to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The two leaders agreed to work towards a peaceful solution in the Middle East. Afterward, a reporter asked the Palestinian Authority chairman if he would apologize to Israel and Germany ahead of the 50th anniversary of the Munich Olympics massacre. During the 1972 Summer Games, Palestinian terrorists took Israeli athletes and coaches hostage, murdering 11 of them and a German policeman. Abbas's answer led to outrage in Germany, Israel, and beyond.
Since 1947 and until today, Israel has committed 50 massacres in 50 Palestinian villages. 50 massacres, 50 Holocaust, and until now, every day. They were dead at the hands of the Israeli army. We are saying enough of this. Come to peace.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid called the comments a monstrous lie, tweeting, 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust, including 1.5 million Jewish children. History will never forgive him. Defense Minister Benny Gantz, who met with Abbas recently over security issues, called his words despicable and false. The reprehensible and unfounded comparison between the Holocaust and the IDF is Holocaust denial. Those who seek peace are expected to acknowledge the past and not to distort reality and rewrite history. Abbas later partially walked back his comments in a statement, saying he had no intention of denying the Holocaust and calling it the most heinous crime in modern human history. Ephraim Zuroff, director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, says people should not have been surprised.
Abu Mazen, after all, wrote a doctorate about Holocaust denial.
While Chancellor Scholz took flack for not immediately denouncing the remarks, he later tweeted in German and English, I am disgusted by the outrageous remarks made by Palestinian President Mahmud Abbas. For us Germans in particular, any relativization of the singularity of the Holocaust is intolerable and unacceptable. I condemn any attempt to deny the crimes of the Holocaust.
Across the whole political spectrum in Germany, there was outrage, justifiably outrage. I mean, to say a thing like that in the Chancellery, in Berlin, where all this began, I mean, this is just unbelievable.
Despite the momentary outrage, Zuroff concedes business will likely go on as usual.
And the question is, what price will Abu Mazen pay? And I'm afraid he won't pay any price whatsoever. The EU will continue to send him millions of dollars. He'll continue to pay his terrorists. And it's as if nothing happened.
From Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza, along with militias in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, it's no secret Iran has a vast terror network across the Middle East, driven by extreme hatred of the United States and Israel. Now the regime could be expanding its reach by cashing in on a strategic partnership decades in the making. The key player is likely Al-Qaeda's next leader. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke has the details.
The U.S. drone strike that eliminated Al-Qaeda's Ayman al-Zawahiri could also have put into motion an even more dangerous phase in the global war on terror, one with Iran at the helm.
One might not expect that the world's leading state-sponsored terrorism that's a Shia revolutionary regime would partner with a Sunni terrorist group. These are oil and water, you might think. But in actuality, there is a very close relationship between these two.
Iran's connection to Al-Qaeda dates back to the early 1990s, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard helped Osama bin Laden run jihadist training camps in Sudan. The regime also offered safe haven to Al-Qaeda leadership fleeing Afghanistan in the wake of 9/11. Saif al-Adil, a face on the FBI's first list of most wanted terrorists, was among those protected.
Saif al-Adil is next in line to be leader of Al-Qaeda. He's the crown prince of Al-Qaeda, if you will. Now, there's no guarantee that Al-Qaeda leadership is actually going to tap him, but that's the smart bet. And Saif al-Adil has been living the Al-Qaeda life in Iran for many years.
There's concern Iran will now seek to take advantage of that relationship, bringing Al-Qaeda into the fold as another proxy to do the regime's dirty work.
Al-Qaeda and Iran have common enemies. They both hate the United States. They both hate Israel. They both hate Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni Gulf monarchies. If Al-Qaeda is mounting terrorist attacks against all or any of those organizations, that advances Iran's strategic objectives, and it does so in a way that's deniable.
Nathan Sales, former ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism under the Trump administration, says the wild card in how this will all play out is Afghanistan.
Now that the Taliban is back in business of providing safe haven to senior Al-Qaeda figures, as we saw with Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was living in the heart of downtown Kabul, presumably under Taliban protection, does that mean that other Al-Qaeda leaders likewise are going to relocate themselves and their families into the safe haven of Afghanistan under Taliban control?
If that happens, Sales tells CBN News it could change the relationship between Al-Qaeda and Iran. Other experts warn it could also result in a sort of three-way unholy alliance.
They're not identical ideologically. They come from very distinct backgrounds. but they're willing to put their differences aside when it comes to their hatred towards the West broadly and America specifically.
Gabriel Nerona, former Iran advisor for the State Department, says no matter how this plays out, the U.S. needs a proactive approach.
I think we have to really up our counterterrorism strike capability. We need to work with local partners, have intelligence on the ground so we can identify these threats and take them out early. And then I think the big thing is money. Money is the sinews of war. If you don't have money, you can't do a whole lot. I think we need to get a lot more serious about our sanctions.
Since President Biden took office, there's been a clear pivot away from counterterrorism efforts towards the threat posed by China. While both Nerona and Ambassador Sales agree that's important, they warn we can't afford to be complacent in the Middle East. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, translating the original covenant, sparking a global revolution in Bible access. 90% of the world's languages do not have a translation of the Old Testament, known in Hebrew as the Tanakh. As Chris Mitchell reports, a movement seeks to change that and spur a global revolution in Bible access.
On Pentecost this year, these men and women gathered at the Garden Tomb to work on expanding the use of the Old or Original Testament worldwide.
Original Testament gap refers to the fact that the Original Testament is under-translated, underused, and frequently misunderstood.
We therefore commit to do all that we can to accelerate the translation of the original testaments into every living language in order to help fulfill the Great Commission.
That resulted in signing the Jerusalem Declaration to eliminate the Original Testament gap.
Well, that's what this consultation is about. We have people from around the globe that have gathered here very prayerfully to seek the Lord, saying, Lord, we're now aware that there is this very significant gap. Would you show us what we're to do and how you would see this eliminated, this gap eliminated?
YWAM's David Hamilton explains why they chose to use the term Original Testament.
Because when something's old, you just want to toss it out and replace it with something else. Original speaks of a foundation that has legacy and value in a multi-generational way. The Original Testament was the Bible that Jesus and the apostles used, and we want everyone to have access to it. The New Testament is most comprehensible when it's really connected to the Original Testament.
They point out that this is needed to fully understand the New Testament.
The Original Testament is the foundation for us to understand the gospel of the kingdom that Jesus came preaching.
Can you imagine reading the New Testament and you come across mention of David or Abraham or Moses or Rahab or Gideon or any of the other heroes of our faith, or places like Bethel or Jericho or Jerusalem, and events like crossing the Red Sea or manna in the desert, and you have no idea in your language what those stories were about? What happened? Who were these people?
To illustrate their point, they published the Gap Testament, a version of the New Testament without any references to the Original Testament.
So when there's a direct quotation, the text is whited out. When there's an intentional allusion, it's toned down to watermark level. And so this is what it looks like in Acts 7, when Stephen is talking and giving his sermon that gets him killed. And all but 2 verses are direct quotations out of the Original Testament. And you can see as you go through the scriptures, different parts are just missing, because when we read it, the New Testament, without an understanding of the original, we do not get the full picture of God's purposes. So we just want the fullness of God's good word to be available to all people. The goal is the whole word for the whole world.
Now comes the strategy, tools, and help they need to accomplish this huge goal.
First we're going to ask the Lord that His Spirit will stir people in their hearts and that they will want to participate and understand how important it is to understand that the only scripture that Jesus' disciples and Paul had was the original Testament.
And they're asking for the body of Christ to join them.
If you have this burden to eliminate that gap, we would invite you to start praying for it. Pray for all the languages in the world. 90% of languages do not have the original Testament. Start praying for those languages.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, victims of the war in Ukraine find physical and spiritual comfort at an Orphans' Promise Center in Poland. Now to the war in Ukraine, where atrocities by Russian troops are fueling the refugee crisis that's forced millions to flee the country. However, victims are finding physical and spiritual comfort at a center run by CBN's Orphans' Promise in neighboring Poland. Lucille Talusin reports from Warsaw.
Ukrainian mother Oksana Horbunova showed CBN News this video of utter destruction she shot while driving to Irpin and Bucha, cities bombed by Russia. On these trips, she brings food and much-needed supplies to residents trapped in the war zone, then transports women, children, and the elderly back to Poland. Oksana shared accounts of the barbaric acts Russian soldiers have inflicted on civilians.
I saw moms that cannot live because her 3 daughters being raped in front of her and 2 of them are died. And I saw kids who saw how their grandmas and moms being raped on their eyes and they cannot talk because of the stress. 2 my friends, Christians, were helping to evacuate people in a village not far from Kiev, and they've been murdered and killed to the death. War, it's when army is go against the army. It's hard to call this war Israel war, because it's mostly like evil against the humanity.
Oksana says there is a tremendous need to help war victims overcome trauma, and this is why she, church partners, and other humanitarian organizations are happy that CBN's Orphans' Promise is now in Poland.
Today is very historical because the first Orphans' Promise Center behind me is being opened. And this is very timely because there are millions of Ukrainian refugees, especially mothers and children, and they are here and they will be able to get all the support that they need through Orphans' Promise.
I think God is using all of these circumstances to bring people to Him. He's using us during this time to bring all of these people who are lost, who lost everything, but they're gonna find the only thing that they need in life here is the relationship with Jesus.
Orphans' Promise works with a Hand of Help organization at this training center. There is a divine connection in that Hand of Help director Misha Babyak and his wife worked with Orphans' Promise in Berdyansk, Ukraine. 5 years ago, Misha and his family moved to Poland at the Lord's direction, not knowing why.
God impressed in my heart that there will be a united work with CBN and Orphans' Promise. When the war broke out, we began helping refugees. Through this partnership, God will touch the hearts of the Ukrainian people. In this center, they will learn how to trust God. Now we understand why God has called us here.
Orphans' Promise organized kids camps for Ukrainian kids and teenagers. They played games, did crafts, and learned about Jesus through Superbook. As one mother put it, "What did you do with my kids? They were finally happy again this week. I heard them laughing again." Lucille Talusin, CBN News, Warsaw.
Still ahead, a life-size replica of Noah's Ark causing doubts to fall away. Did you ever wonder if Noah's Ark could really have been big enough to keep all those animals safe from the biblical flood? As Paul Strand reports from Kentucky, standing next to an accurate reproduction of the Ark may cause any doubts to fall away.
More than 1 million people a year have flocked to central Kentucky's Ark Encounter since it opened in 2016. Sure, you've heard of Noah and the Ark, but you may have never really been impressed by the scale of what the man built until you're standing by an exact replica of the Ark. Then you realize why it took him a few decades to build it. Not a couple, a few. Quite a few. The Ark Encounter's Patrick Kanuski says the length, width, and height are all accurate.
It's the biblical proportions. These are the dimensions from Genesis.
One amazing revelation expert nautical engineers brought in to consult found as they studied God's design for the Ark that it was absolute perfection.
It's a perfect dimensions for seaworthiness, weight distribution, smoothness of ride.
When CBN News first visited the Ark as it was being built, it was pretty much a huge rectangle with hardly anything inside. Now, the 10-story high vessel is crammed with more than 100 exhibits and stuffed with animals in their flood time cages. A model inside the Ark shows how they could have all fit.
Could it have actually been able to house, 6,000 to 7,000 animals. Yeah, we think so.
And tourists can ask Noah himself about such things because versions of his entire family are on board and Noah's talks.
It really wasn't hard to find the animals since God brought them right to me, just as he said he would.
Noah's family teaches a great lesson in racial harmony, reminding visitors, no matter their color, everyone on earth is a descendant of Noah, all just one human race.
And from these 8 people actually comes the rest of us here in the world.
The exhibits show human history from the time of perfection in the Garden of Eden, then illustrate the downward spiral as sin, death, and destruction came into the ancient world, bringing humanity finally to a time of judgment and the biblical flood. Ark Encounter also gives visitors the hope that Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection bring mankind. The main door that Noah's family and all the animals would have come through is lit up on the inside with Christ's cross.
It's a metaphor, if you will, for salvation, safety.
A lesson you get while moving through what Kanuski reveals is the largest timber frame structure in the world.
Some people have equated it to the 8th wonder of the modern world.
Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Ark Encounter in Kentucky.
That's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.